Good morning, Dawg Nation. I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. We are glad you are with us today. Fun on a Thursday. Terrence Edwards stops by. Also fun today. We get a chance to celebrate more, a really nice story involving a beloved former Dawg. We'll have some of that today, including what he himself has recently said. You'll like that. And off the top of the program, a couple of interesting things. First of all, one example of how Georgia is, by perception, pretty different in 2026 than it was in 2025, and we'll explain why that could result in even more success this season based on a fairly long-standing precedent in college football. It's basically all good news today. We're feeling great about that. Also tonight, Georgia in the SEC tournament, wishing them well against Ole Miss. So all on the way. Glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at georgiadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
There is one thing for Georgia here this year that I think makes it pretty different than it was a year ago. I want to explain what I think that is, but let's first talk about what I think the complexion of the Georgia team was in 2025. It was certainly something that Kirby Smart was pretty eager to talk about and describe and explain, that in a day and age in which Georgia, like a lot of teams across college football, probably not as deep as it once was, the way that lack of depth shows up on a roster like Georgia's is suddenly you've got a lot more first and second year players, freshmen, sophomore players on the two deep than you perhaps would have had in the past. This is especially true when you cycle out of the COVID era, where there were guys, Carson Beck's the best example of this, a 2020 signee that was still on the Georgia roster in 2024. You know, those guys sticking around for a very long time in the same place, there probably is less of that around college football. And so it had set up a situation for Georgia in 2025. All of a sudden, Georgia is this youngish team where a lot of guys, and we know some of the names, it's the Dontrell Glovers, it's the Juan Gastons, guys like that. You've got a lot of these very young players who were called upon to do some big things for UGA. And going into last season, you really got the impression that Kirby Smart had the sense that that's what that 2025 team was going to be about for Georgia. You got young players in key roles, and you've just got to hope they can handle what's coming their way if Georgia wants to do what it was attempting to do in the 2025 season. In fact, if you want to go back to SEC Media Days, which is around the time that Kirby Smart and all the SEC coaches just sort of lay it out and say, this is who we are as a team for this season, that was one of the big points that Kirby Smart brought up of, hey, look how young we are. Look how much of our roster is made up of guys who are just relatively new to college football. This is how Kirby Smart said that last summer.
Our team's going to be comprised of 54% first and second year players. Very big change for us. I thought last year was probably one of the most veteran teams I've been a part of. You guys know the COVID class has kind of aged out. So we had multiple players that were in their fifth and sixth year last year, especially across the offensive and defensive lines. We had a tremendous group that all went out kind of at the same time, aged out at the same time. And so we're going to be really young, especially on the offensive and defensive lines. But 54% of our players are coming into their first or second year. So what do you get with that? You get youthful exuberance.
So Kirby Smart laying it out. I remember the time, now I'm not the smartest person in the world, so maybe this is lost on me, but, 54% of the roster being first or second year players didn't seem wildly out of balance, considering the fact you've got freshmen, sophomores, juniors, seniors, slightly more than half being freshmen and sophomores. Didn't seem wildly out of balance, but Kirby explains that in recent years, because you had both fifth and in some cases six-year guys, that just created a little bit more space on your roster. Georgia was, to hear Kirby Smart tell it, a young team in 2025. And when pressed about that during the season, Kirby thought what existed for Georgia in 2025 would be also the kind of thing that perpetuated in future years too, that he is just prepared for Georgia to be a little younger in most years than maybe he had gotten comfortable with Georgia being in the past because of all the changes that college football endures that we talk about all the time. So I'll give you an example from relatively late last season when Kirby Smart was asked again about the youth that he had mentioned to begin the year. Kirby said, listen, from his standpoint, this is the way it's always going to be. This is what Kirby Smart said about that at the time.
We're going to be young every year, so I don't think college football is going to have old teams anymore. I think they're going to be youth across the board, and I'm going to have to get used to being patient because it's what it is. How fast can you grow your youth compared to others?
So it is with all due respect that I humbly point out that what Kirby says there of, well, everybody's just going to be young all the time now, that's really not true. I mean, you've got very old teams in some cases. A lot of those are transfer players, but there are some teams around college football that have chosen to be old via the transfer portal. It's not experience within that same program. In fact, I saw a number in basketball. This is crazy. Only one SEC senior happens to play for Mississippi State, spent all 4 years at the same school. One player in the entire league, which is kind of crazy. But so you don't have necessarily experience on the same roster, but you do have teams with a lot of experienced college football players, a lot of 22-year-olds, a lot of fifth-year seniors. They just happen to be transfers, and they probably are pretty pricey on the open market. But there are teams that are oldish out there. It just may not be the case for Georgia because Georgia still, for the most part, puts its roster together via high school recruiting. But there are teams that will be old. In fact, we saw very good teams in 2025 that were pretty old. They just happen to be more old with transfer players. But either way, the defining characteristic of Georgia in 2025, to hear Kirby Smart tell the story, was we're a young team. He begins the summer by saying, boy, look how much of our roster's, first and second year players. This is different than it's been the last couple of years. And, in November, as those guys are going through all of this, Kirby says, I'm just going to have to get better at being patient because this is probably what we're going to have going forward. That was Kirby Smart's own telling of one of the prevailing narratives to find his team in 2025. However, it is interesting to point out that when we look ahead to this upcoming season, we have at least some evidence that the prevailing narrative for Georgia this year may actually be a pretty good bit different than what it was a year ago. If Kirby Smart was starting the year last year and saying, look at all of our freshmen and sophomores, look at all the young guys that we're going to be leaning on, this year, it's certainly, at least based on one perspective, seems like Georgia's a lot more experienced in some key areas than it was this time a year ago. And I do think that should be really good news for Georgia, at least it has the potential of being. There was a story at CBS Sports this week that points out that Georgia has the second most returning starters of any team in college football. USC has the most, 15. Georgia is in a group with 14, which also puts it top in the SEC. Now, without getting too deep in the weeds here, there's also a couple of different ways that you can measure returning experience. There are a lot of guys, like we've cited our buddy Dawg Stats before. Dawg Stats does a lot of this stuff, puts it on Twitter and things like that, of returning production. This is basically a percentage of your total stat line from the previous year coming back the next year. Most of the stat-minded, analytics-minded people will tell you that returning production percentage of overall, whether it be yards gained, touchdown scored, sacks, whatever stat you would look at, what percentage of the players responsible for producing those comes back in a future year, that might be a better overall way to measure returning production. Most of the math-oriented people will tell you that. And yet, this is also not math class. We're just doing this for fun right now. So CBS basically looking at guys who were starting the previous year coming back for the future year, and Georgia looks really good on a list like this right now. USC's at the top at 15. I'll show you this on the screen. Georgia has 14 on this list. Second most in all of college football, most in the SEC. Offense credited as returning starters: Gunnar Stockton, Nate Frazier, Lawson Lucky, Drew Bobo, Dontrell Glover, Ernest Green. On the defensive side, you've got Jordan Hall, Xavier McLeod, Gabe Harris, Quintavious Johnson, Raylan Wilson, KJ Bolden, Kyron Jones, Ellis Robinson. Now, let's freeze on this just for a moment, because that in and of itself is a really good thing. Having that kind of returning production on your team, that kind of percentage of returning starters in and of itself is a really good thing, and CBS gives us some of the criteria for why. Indiana did not have this many, but of the previous 8 national champions prior to that, according to CBS, all had at least 11 returning starters. So Indiana had fewer than that. A lot of their guys were also transfers. But prior to that, for 8 straight years, the national champion had at least 11 returning starters. So by Georgia having 14, that puts them in a really nice category. CBS also gives us this, that one of the defining characteristics of national championship contenders is also returning starters. That of the 10 teams with the best odds to win the national championship in 2026, they all have at least 9 returning starters. So to be a national championship contender, the data would suggest that you better have at least a good number of returning starters, and the teams that have won it have all had double digits. So Georgia having 14 returning starters is no small thing. And yet, if you don't mind putting that back up just for one second, the reason why I want to show you this list again is because the news actually gets even a little bit better for Georgia than that, based on the way that CBS tabulates this. 14 is a good number, but look who this doesn't include. Do you consider Juan Gaston a starter-level player for the Georgia offensive line? I certainly do. He played almost as a starter. If you're looking at future NFL draft capital, Gaston's one of your top guys. I mean, if I had a percentage of future earnings for anybody on the Georgia roster, Gaston would probably be one of the guys I'd be looking to latch on to. I think he's a future first-round pick. But on a list like this, he doesn't count as a returning starter, and yet he's one of Georgia's most valuable commodities just from an elite human capital standpoint. He's one of Georgia's most valuable commodities, but in the list like this, does not count as a returning starter. Same thing for defense. When you look at guys who are listed there, do you think of Chris Cole as a starter-level player? Now, technically, he was a backup last year playing in a hybrid combined role, but on a list like this, he was not considered a starter player for Georgia, even though he led the team in sacks. But are you glad to have Chris Cole on this roster for 2026? And would you view Cole as one of your most important players? I think you would. Similar story for a guy like Elijah Griffin, who is also not listed as a starter-level player, but we think that Griffin's going to probably be one of the best players on this defense here this season. You could say something similar about DeMello Jones, who certainly played a lot. You could say something about transfer guys who come in that technically don't count on a list like this, like certainly Khalil Barnes, who's going to probably play a lot, Amaris Williams, who might play a lot, that there are a lot of really good players for Georgia who we have, I think, legitimate expectations for that don't count as starter-level players. And yet, even with that, Georgia's still looking really good from a returning starter standpoint. You can take that down now. Thank you so much. So this is part of why, and I think I've said this to multiple guests this week. I think I've said this on the show with just speaking to you. I'm pretty optimistic about Georgia. I'm actually feeling ahead of spring practice, spring break for these players and coaches coming to an end over the course of the next couple of days. They'll get to work next week. I feel about as good about Georgia right now as I think you can. Just looking at who Georgia's competing with, looking at what Georgia has, I think all of this just feels really good right now to have this level of experience returning for Georgia. This puts Georgia in a rare category of contenders for this year's national championship, and it probably demonstrates some year-over-year improvement, a big change for Georgia in 2026 compared to what it was in 2025. Now, let me finish, though, by saying this. I was looking at a different story online this week. There's a guy called Ari Wasserman who writes for On3, and he was talking about something related to Kirby Smart the other day about that, Georgia's won back-to-back SEC championships, but in this 12-team playoff era, haven't won a national championship yet, and, been eliminated from the playoff in their first game the last 2 years. And, one of the things that Ari asked is, well, is this level of impatience creeping in? Is there some restlessness creeping in because Georgia hasn't advanced as far in the postseason as it wants to? And look, I think that, I think two things about this. Thing number one is it's really interesting to me on how much of a stiff curve Georgia gets graded on. The idea that, Georgia hadn't won a national championship in a couple of years or 4 years, whatever it is now. That's a pretty stern measuring stick, and I don't really think many programs get measured that way. Seems like Georgia probably does, and some of that's because of how resourced Georgia is overall, and so to a certain extent that I get it. And yet, even if I'm a little bit skeptical of grading Georgia on such a harsh curve, I don't think it's completely unfair to say, well, is there some restlessness here? Is there some impatience here? Is some of this creeping in of, we're ready to see Georgia play a little deeper into January. It's been a few years, ready to see Georgia make a big playoff run again. I don't think that's completely unfair. I really don't. That I'm guessing Georgia probably does feel some of this to a certain extent, which is one of the reasons why I like reading the stuff we just read in CBS Sports, that these formerly young players who got experience as first or in some cases second-year guys, now they are seasoned returning starters. And, as I made mention the other day, the 2021 national championship for Georgia is now 5 years ago. At least this fall it will be, coming up on the 5-year anniversary of that. The 2022 national championship is, this fall 4 years ago. That means you've got an entire crop of players that weren't a part of those teams that perhaps do want their own success, and they want to write their name in the record books and the history books and have the accolades that the previous Georgia players who perhaps were part of the reason they chose to come to Georgia, maybe they want to have that same kind of success too, and have their own history, their own chapter, championships that can belong to them with their fingerprints on the ring and their fingerprints on the trophy in a way that they just weren't able to enjoy in 2021, 2022, because most of these guys, I guess all of these guys now, just weren't on that team. And that's what brings me back to something else that Kirby Smart said back last July. The young players that got experience last season that now give many of them a chance to be returning starters here this season, there's also a hunger to that. You heard Kirby a minute ago say youthful exuberance. They may be inexperienced, but they're exuberant. There's an enthusiasm about playing the game. Well, I would say great, because now that former hunger for playing time, opportunity to show what you're all about, now gets paired with a good bit of experience, and now these guys in 2026 can go out and satisfy the restlessness, the impatience of, when are we going to have our moment? When are we going to make our deep playoff run? Well, this upcoming season, they get a chance to do that. And to punctuate this, let me go back to Kirby Smart again last July about when you do have a young team like Georgia did a year ago, what that creates in terms of an atmosphere within the program. And the seeds that were planted for that last year, maybe we experienced the harvest of that here this fall. Let me hear Kirby Smart again.
We've had practices that have been spirited. We had a great spring practice that we talked about the words fire, passion, and energy. I think the biggest thing that separates college football teams today is complacency among players versus fire, passion, and energy among players. So we've tried to highlight those traits as much as possible with our players. Our players need to bring juice and energy each and every day. If they don't, they'll be confronted by the players that do. And if the players continue to do that, we'll have a successful season and a successful football team.
I think that's really well said by Kirby, and we all got very used to hearing fire, passion, and energy last year. But sometimes there's a little bit of a delayed release to something like that. Last year, an inexperienced Georgia team gained experience, and players demonstrated the fire, passion, and energy. And some of what happened last year may set the tone for, hopefully anyway, the success that Georgia enjoys this fall. And that's why next week with the start of spring practice is so important. Some of these guys aren't quite so young anymore. Now they count as returning starters. And Georgia's got about as many of those as any national championship contender could hope for, and a bunch of guys who may not count as starters who are also pretty experienced in their own right too. It is setting up pretty well for Georgia right now. It's not a perfect roster. There are still some questions, but Georgia has a lot going for it. So next week, when spring practice begins, it could be the start of a really fun journey. And if there is some restlessness and some impatience because seasons the last couple of years have ended a little sooner than Georgia fans want to, that may not happen in 2026. This may be the kind of roster that can make a big run towards this. And the work towards making that happen begins next week as spring practice starts. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. What a great thrill it is to have you today. We're proud to have you part of our program. If you're live on video, you're on demand on video, podcast. And I'm telling you right now, one of the things that fills me with so much pride, and try not to be a prideful person, that's usually a dangerous thing, but if there is a good kind of pride, it's this. The fact that so many years ago, we start podcast only, that's all we had. And to this day, it remains our venerable platform, people listening to the show, connecting with us, choosing to allow us to go with them for whatever they're doing. They're driving on the roads, long commute, they're doing their exercise routine, whatever it is. The folks that continue to listen to us via podcast, thousands of you every day, I just appreciate that so much. What a thrill that is for me to be able to have the honor of speaking about Georgia football with you each and every day. Really, really love all of that. And I couldn't do it if not for our friends at Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. And I'll tell you right now, I don't like divorce. I can tell you personal stories about people that I've known that have had to go through this, and it's a hard journey, and it comes with some complications and some challenges that I wouldn't wish on anyone. And no one goes into a marriage certainly wishing this on themselves. But we also know this, and it'd be foolish to pretend otherwise. Life just happens. And what nobody planned for sometimes becomes a reality that must be confronted, that cannot be avoided. So what do you do then in that situation? Well, it is for circumstances like that that I am truly grateful that Merriweather and Tharp exists, because I think for people who find themselves in a tricky circumstance, in a challenging situation, and that's what divorce is, the generosity with which Merriweather and Tharp approaches advocacy for people like that, man, that is a really great thing. It is a life's work. It's a mission. It's a tremendous ambition. And I'm glad to have Merriweather and Tharp out there doing that. And when they grow, it makes me happy, because I know that more people who are in a situation they didn't ask for are getting the help that they need. And that's why the other day I saw where Merriweather and Tharp opened a brand new office in Flowery Branch. I know a lot of people in Flowery Branch, and I'm glad for people who, once again, find themselves in a tough spot. Merriweather and Tharp is there to help them get through it and set them up for, as we say a lot, more happiness to come in that next season of life. Making the decision to do the next right thing now can lead to happier times later, and I do really, really appreciate Merriweather and Tharp being able to do that. So they've grown by leaps and bounds. It's Flowery Branch now, I think Warner Robins, Carrollton, Savannah, Athens. Like, there's all kinds of new offices open. The great level of service they provided in Atlanta, now provided everywhere pretty much across the state. So if you've got questions about the divorce process, Merriweather and Tharp has answers for you, and you can set up for that free initial consultation and talk to them about what is next for you, and is this the right thing? And they're going to give you wise counsel on that, and you'll be very, very grateful to get it. So find them online. It's GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. That is GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. Merriweather and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. All right, we got Terrence Edwards coming up in a moment. We always love that. Prior to that, let's go around the doghouse, presented today by our friends at Daytona Beach. And man, oh man, do I love Daytona Beach, and man, oh man, do I wish I was at Daytona Beach right now. It's cold and rainy today. You hate that. It makes me dream about being at the beach. I think I have the beach in my blood. I need to be close to the ocean. I need to be close to all of that. And Daytona Beach certainly gives me a chance to do that. But that said, we got great stuff going on today, because one of the things that we have recently had reason to celebrate is a huge contract extension signed by the former Georgia defensive lineman, Jordan Davis. We're told it's the largest contract ever for a nose guard in the NFL, which I think is great. Nobody more deserving than that. And really cool thing, on the event of Davis re-signing in Philadelphia, they brought him out for a press conference, and this got a lot of attention within the Georgia social media sphere. And I thought some of these quotes from Davis were just amazing. So just for fun here right now, Jordan Davis, one of our all-time favorites, re-signing with Philadelphia, talking about what that moment meant to him, including for a guy like this who really embodied what it meant to be in Georgia while at Georgia, seems to understand a lot about what the Philadelphia sports culture is about, too. And I thought this was great from Jordan. Here he is on re-signing with the Eagles.
The city is beautiful. The city is amazing with a lot of charm. Philadelphia is a place where people, blue-collar, hard workers, wake up on Sundays and watch football. And when they cheer hard. They cheer with their passion. It's everything. And
So listen, I have said that one of the weirdest things for me is that two, Philadelphia and Georgia, two areas that approach sports, I would say, pretty differently. One of the weirdest things with the Philly Dogs has been the fact that, guys like Jordan Davis have brought these Philadelphia sports fans and these Georgia sports fans in common cause in a way that you probably never would have thought before. And listen, while I am very different than the average Philadelphia sports fan, and the average Philadelphia sports fan is very different from me, I do believe they deserve their own sporting culture. I really do. I believe they deserve the chance to look at what they think makes their city special, their region special, and say, hey, this is what it means to play for the Philadelphia Eagles. And for a guy like Jordan Davis, who just seems to have emotional intelligence off the charts, the fact that when he was in Georgia, he's like, because he's originally from North Carolina, that he's like, this is what Georgia football is all about, and I'm going to embody what these fans want. Recognize, hey, this is what makes Philadelphia different than the other cities in its region, like New York, Boston, places like that, Washington, D.C., a little to the south. This is what makes Philadelphia unique, and I appreciate that about the place that I'm playing now. Honestly, even though I really don't like Philadelphia that much, it's cool to hear Jordan Davis say, I'm a part of this city right now, and I want to be about what they're about, and I appreciate the way in which they approach this. I just think that's really cool. Something else that I thought was really cool, in the press conference where Davis was being celebrated for his new contract, one of the attendees was one of his former Georgia teammates. I mean, this is one of those things that you just continue to see such a strong bond with these guys. Apparently, Jalen Carter was on hand in the room along with one of the assistant coaches as Davis was honored this week, and Jordan gave Jalen Carter a shout-out. If you're a Georgia fan, of course, you'll love this. Here that is.
it means a lot, man. Seeing JC in the hallway upstairs, Coach Clint, Coach Clint, let's not get it misconstrued. Coach Clint is required to be here because he's on the clock right now. So he's really taking a break. But but seeing JC, man, brighten up my day. I wasn't expecting it. But, it just shows the importance of just the connection and the love that we have for each other.
So the JC is obviously Jalen Carter. And first of all, funny jokes, but the assistant coach, but also really moved by the fact that Carter's there for him. It reminds me of all those guys in Jordan Davis's year. Jalen Carter, of course, was the next year, but all those guys that were at the NFL Scouting Combine, coming out to watch everybody do their drills and perform. There was a unique bond to those teams, and I think it was a part of the reason they were so successful. And the fact that it still exists these years later, I don't know. I take a lot from that. That's pretty enjoyable. One more from Jordan Davis this week, just for fun, on now that he moves into the next phase of his NFL career, achieving that second contract, really in a position of leadership now with the Philadelphia Eagles, and that's a role that Davis says he takes really seriously. Here's Jordan Davis again.
You can be a leader in many different ways. You don't have to have a C on your chest to be a leader. Now that I have that experience, I have that years under my belt, I have the difference and the ability to change the way that I play and change the way that I feel about myself and change the way that I think and just everything. Everything's changed. I have more of a way to connect with players. Like when somebody comes in, they're like, man, I'm just struggling at this time. I'll be there for them because I went through it. Like BG went through it. Like BG was there for me, still is.
So I just think incredibly interesting words, easy to root for. My goodness, is anybody any easier to root for than what Jordan Davis is? It's great to see. And before we bring on Terrence Edwards, obviously last year our Cody Chafin's got a chance to catch up with Jordan Davis. The Philadelphia Eagles, obviously world champions a year ago. And Super Bowl opening night's a big opportunity for the media to get a little more access to players than you normally might get. And Cody there on behalf of DawgNation, catching up with some of these former Georgia guys and having some fun with Jordan Davis, who even as he goes into this tremendous success he's enjoying in the NFL, still has really fond memories of his time at Georgia. So fun little add-on here. Here's our Cody Chafin's with Jordan Davis last year.
I wouldn't be here without him, man. I wouldn't be here without him. And, he's done a lot for us, still doing a lot for us, and we just grateful for him. you can't even replicate that because he's just a ball of emotion, man. It doesn't matter, man. He's just gonna say whatever's on his mind, and I do miss those pregame speeches though. If I could do it all over again, man, it would be so amazing.
So obviously some very nice words there for Kirby Smart to give you an idea how weird Super Bowl opening night can be if you're watching a video. Is it Guillermo? Is that the guy's name from the Jimmy Kimmel show? So you got Cody, Jordan Davis, and like Guillermo from Jimmy Kimmel just hanging off to the side there to give you an idea of how odd that thing can be from time to time. Yeah, that's Guillermo. There he is. You see him in the bottom of the screen. Obviously, Jordan Davis towers over him. And I was saying this when I was with my friends at 960 Ref on the radio this week. I'll wrap up after this. So Davis in his last year, he wins the Outland Trophy. He wins the Bednarik Award for the nation's top defensive player. He's not quite Mount Rushmore at Georgia because that's a pretty crowded thing. But I feel pretty comfortable in saying, boy, he's knocking on the door being top 10 program all time. I mean, when you have that kind of senior season, multiple national awards, obviously a drought-breaking national championship, I feel pretty confident saying that. And I realize it's a very, very crowded race to be one of the 10 best players in Georgia history. And I'm obviously not ready to give you all 10 right now because I don't know that I could do that without leaving out somebody who deserves to be there. But since we weren't alive for all the various eras of Georgia football, the only thing you can go on are hardware, accomplishments, national championship, Outland, Bednarik. That's got to be close to top 10 all time in Georgia history. It's got to be for a career. Pretty close to being in a pretty rare category, and obviously continuing to enjoy great success right now. I love to see it. We'll make that Around the Doghouse presented today by our friends at Daytona Beach, and I love to see Daytona Beach too. My story is, and I always tell these sentimental stories, and I apologize, but every summer growing up, got in the car, drove to Daytona Beach, and listen, my car trips down to the beach were just like yours were. We're all packed into a car with very little in the way of like creature comforts and amenities. And, kids these days got their, devices the entire time. We just sat there and stared at the road for what felt like 100 hours. But we had eventually get to Daytona Beach, and man, we had such a good time every single year. Got a chance to see all the great landmarks, the Ponce Inlet Lighthouse, the Main Street Pier, all of the things that make Daytona a memory maker for people even right now too. It's one of the reasons why I love telling Daytona Beach's story here as a part of Around the Doghouse, because it's a big part of my origin story. It's a big part of my family lore, and it can be for yours too. And a lot of you are getting ready for spring break. I'd say reach out right now and find out what kind of savings opportunities can you still get when it comes to Daytona Beach, because 23 miles of shoreline, that means a lot of resorts, a lot of hotel options and things like that, and probably better savings than you might realize. So that's the opportunity available to you when it comes to Daytona Beach. So I want you to reach out and find them online right now. It's DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals. That's DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals. Great time to get away. Daytona Beach, great opportunity. You can even fly there directly from Atlanta, so it's super convenient. Great to have Daytona Beach as a part of Around the Doghouse here on DawgNation Daily. And here on a Thursday for us, great also to have a guy like Terrence Edwards. What a thrill it is to speak to him each and every week. He joins us here today. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Glad to have him and all of you with us here today.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let's say hello to Terrence Edwards. Terrence, I don't know that either one of us want to get into like ranking the true top 10, because that's a pretty intense effort here on a Thursday. But if you're Jordan Davis, Outland Trophy Best Interior Lineman, Bednarik Award Top Defensive Player, a huge part of the reason why Georgia won its first national championship in 40 years, you got to say there aren't very many Georgia careers that are better than that. I mean, to me, there are a handful of truly historic players that have come through in the Kirby Smart era. I got to put Jordan Davis pretty close to the top based on what he did while he was here. You agree with that, right?
I'm very comfortable with saying top 15. Very comfortable with saying top 15. Top 10, there's going to be a lot of debate, but top 15 in Georgia history, I'm very comfortable with he would be in the top 15 in Georgia history.
No, I think that's probably fair to say it that way. I do. And listen, you played professionally, your brother played professionally. Y'all know what it takes to even get into the NFL. When you get that second contract, and we're obviously seeing Davis do this. We saw the Las Vegas Raiders, and I guess this trade, these acquisitions are still on after the Mason Crosby thing, or actually the Max Crosby thing. But Quay Walker and Kobe Dean. When you get that second contract, what does it mean to these players who are getting a chance to do that, have done that, will do that, when you really, in many cases, set your family up now long term forever because of the chance to be able to do that? How significant is that for the Georgia players that we've been able to see enjoy that here this week?
I think it's just it's a really great thing to show the way Kirby recruited talented players. Now that they're able to continue the same success that they had at Georgia, that goes for the development of these players as well. I think it's just not their football play; it's just the young men that they've developed into. So you can start that back as far as uh, Coach Smart identifying the type of player that he want on his team, and I'm happy for these guys being able to just gain the fruits of their labor is being able to set their family up as generational money and just something that I think they deserve.
And as you say, there's also an incredible level of credibility here for Kirby Smart and these Georgia coaches because you know how it is. I mean, Terrence, you're now the one delivering these messages. And at one point in your life, you'd have been hearing these messages. Coaches are harping on stuff all the time. And as a player, it's very easy to want to tune that out and feel like you have reason to say, gosh, wish this guy would just shut up. But when a guy like Kirby Smart can say, I told Jordan Davis this, and now look what he's doing. I told Quay Walker this, now look what he's doing. I told these other guys this, and look at the money they're reaping in the NFL. It does give these coaches a much taller platform to stand on when they can say, the stuff I'm pushing you to do, I pushed those guys to do, and now, they can live on a yacht if they want to because of the money they're making. I mean, that's a pretty big deal, right?
It is, and I'm pretty sure when these family comes in for visits or unofficial visits, they have all this data uh, ready to show the families that yes, NIL is lovely. I love the players being able to make money as early as they are today. But this is the money that you want. This is the money that is gonna take your family truly over the top. If you just could give me 4 to 5 years of me coaching you as hard as I can because I believe in you, this is what is at the end of the tunnel. And they can actually show families this that um, it actually works. The formula that he's put into place actually works. And you just seen three teammates get big paydays in Nicole Dean and Jordan Davis and Quay Walker. Three teammates, just got paid off the same team and off the same speech that's Kirby's been given for the last 11 years now.
And I'll say this, then we'll talk about something different, which is, look, I think most fans are probably similar to me. I'm not against players getting paid. Even like the big eye popping numbers that you sometimes see, it doesn't really mean that much to me one way or another. But there is something that feels gratifying about the fact that guys like Jordan Davis and some of the others we're talking about, hey, the big payday came on the other side of hard work. Something about that just feels, I guess, more normal or more easily accepted, or it just feels like the way that things are supposed to be. You put in the work, you developed your body, you developed your soul, you got better at football, and you were rewarded for you delayed gratification and you were rewarded for your efforts. There are elements of some of these stories, Terrence, that just sort of feels like this is how life is supposed to be. And I think that's one of the things that's comforting about this is, hey, Jordan Davis is getting the big payday because he put the work in. That just feels like a pretty good story to tell. And the flip side of that is, and once again, I'm not necessarily mad about it, but when the very young guy gets tons of money before he's even done anything, I don't know, it just feels like a very different kind of story than some of these stories that we're able to celebrate right now. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, and I'm not against your argument. I'm not against it, and I love to see, especially kids like Jordan Davis, who was an afterthought. I'm pretty sure when we signed Jordan Davis, a lot of fans on the message boards like another wasted 3-star. Kirby, is it like? So I love to see stores like Jordan Davis, who really actually got it out the mud, had to transform his body into the body that we see today. He had to really work to get everything that he's earned. So stores like Jordan Davis, I love to see him be able to cash in on his hard work over the last, say, 12 to 15 years, starting back from middle school to high school to college, now into professional ranks. These are the stores that we ought to talk about.
I was talking before you joined us about, Georgia, at least according to one list, 14 returning starters, essentially as many as anybody, other than I guess USC's got one more, but right there near the top on this. Terrence, last year we spent a lot of time talking about how young and inexperienced Georgia was. And obviously at a position like wide receiver, they're still pretty inexperienced for this year. That's something you and I have talked plenty about. But to have numerous returning offensive linemen, a lot of returning starters at all three levels of the defense. I think this sets up really well for Georgia, that it seems like on paper they've got the kind of experience that does at least provide the potential for a special season. How important is it for Georgia to be able to bring back the experience that, at least on paper, it seems that they're bringing back for this season?
Yes, I think one thing that Kirby does a great job with, and I think other schools kind of negatively recruit against Georgia, is about how much they rotate. And if fans and parents and families really just dig deep in it, Georgia plays a lot of freshmen. So if you're willing to come in and put the work in, and Kirby's going to play the best players. So if you're a freshman coming in and you're rotating, you're going to get playing time, and then the following year, your reps is going to increase, and you won't be an inexperienced player. I just think about how fresh your body would be, not playing 1,000 snaps in the season, and you paid 700. So I just think they do a great job of putting fresh players on the field, and that goes to his recruiting, that you could go 2 and 3 deep and still get the same type of that the level of play does not plateau. It stays the same or go get even better. Look at Elijah Griffin. We just think the world of him taking over for Christian Miller next
Yeah.
year, and he got opportunity to play a lot. Now he's going to be an experienced sophomore instead of an inexperienced redshirt freshman.
Finish with this. Georgia does begin spring practice next week. What are you hopeful to hear? What would you like to see? What would be on your mind about Georgia going into this process for a few weeks of getting ready for the upcoming season? What would you like to hear or see from Georgia as spring practice begins?
I just think, like everyone, I'm looking to see which other receivers step up. I'm also looking to see Gunner taking that next step, being able to now. Um, we we all want them to push the ball downfield more, and I think now, as a second year full starter, I think this is a big spring for Gunner, and I would like to see which receivers step up to be the guy. I don't know who that's going to be. It could be Isaiah Kane. It could be Talon Taylor. It could be Humphreys. I don't know, but I love the group. I think it's a very talented group. Now we need to see the quarterback position take the next step. Play really well this year, but I want to see Gunner, and I know Gunner would take that next step. And then who's going to break out to be the breakout receiver this year?
Well, and I'll finish by saying what's fun about that for fans, the wide receiver position, is, to me, it's the easiest thing to tell in a G-Day situation, right? It's like if I'm trying to evaluate interior line play, I don't know. You have to watch that very closely, and I think different people sometimes come away with different opinions. But when it comes to a receiver making plays, everybody can tell that. Who creates separation, who hauls in the football, how does that look? And sometimes spring games exist to serve those highlight plays too, which is never a bad thing. So if wide receiver's a question and we're looking to see who steps up, to the extent that folks get a chance to see G-Day this year, that's a fairly easy thing to notice, which I think makes it fun for fans, right?
Yes, it is. They're on the outside, and you can see what's going on. Instead of in the interior, there's a lot of things that just a common fan just don't know what's going on. But you can see who's making plays. You can see who's explosive. You can see who's catching the ball at a high rate. So you can see those things easily. So I think we're all excited to watch those catchers go out there and catch football. Then we want to see down the field catches. So I'm excited to see which of those young guys step up and take the bull by the horn and become the spring day legend as we see, then carry that over to the fall.
Terrence, great stuff. I appreciate everything you do. Always terrific to have you here on the show on Thursday. And, of course, I love the fact that you're also working with that next generation of wide receiver and pass catcher, too. So for people who want to connect with the Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy, how can they find you online?
You can find me on all social media platforms at Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy, and Bubble Work is Monday and Wednesdays from 6 to 7:30.
I love it, Terrence. Thanks for your time. Really appreciate it. We'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
These coaches like Terrence that love the sport, that love the grind, that, he's got his own team he coaches, but he's also doing the bubble work with individual guys from players all across the state, probably across the region too, for that matter. I really like that from Terrence Edwards. It's fun to be able to have him on the show each week and to get his insight on Georgia football. We got an SEC Through coming up. Can I do a shout out before we get there, though? A reminder that on Saturday, we've got a really fun event that we're lucky enough to be a part of. Our friends at Serpro are sponsoring the First Responders Night at the Athens Rock Lobster. This is going to be a really great experience. We had a chance to do this last year. I'm hoping my family gets to come this year, too. I'm definitely going to be there. I'm hopeful that my family gets to come, although we got people out of town and all kinds of crazy stuff going on. So I don't really know. But I'll definitely be there. And it's going to be an awesome experience. So I want you to find out more about this. Athens Rock Lobsters hockey team that plays Aikens Ford Arena there in downtown Athens, and they've got the First Responders Night coming up presented by Serpro. So all throughout the game, policemen, firemen going to be celebrated, the heroes in our community that really, frankly, allow us to live in a comfortable civilization. We're going to honor them as we should be, and nobody believes in that more so than our folks from Serpro. So that's an awesome experience. But here's where DawgNation comes in on this, because before the game outside in downtown Athens, we're going to have, have you ever been to like a touch truck type thing or anything like that? A lot of the vehicles, police, the Serpro Mobile Command Center, we'll have DawgNation swag to give away. It's a really fun experience outside the arena before everybody goes in for the hockey game. So this weekend, if you're looking for something great to do with your family, I think this is it. Come by and see me personally. I'll be there starting about 4 p.m. outside the arena. We'll all go in for the hockey game after that. Serpro brings it all to us. And the fact that one of our great sponsors is also out there doing such great stuff in the community, well, I just really, really love that. So let me give you the website. You can buy your tickets. bit.ly/rocklobstertix, tick spelled T-I-X. bit.ly/rocklobstertix, tick spelled T-I-X. Make sure you check that out today. All right, let's do an SEC Through here for a moment. I saw where former LSU coach, former Notre Dame coach too for that matter, Brian Kelly was on the radio show with Dusty Dvorak and Danny Cannell. And Kelly is talking about both the decision to leave Notre Dame and go to LSU, and then how it all ends for him at LSU. And I was thinking, and I don't necessarily take pleasure in saying this, although I guess he's probably not my favorite guy, but is there any star that's fallen more than Brian Kelly's would have fallen over the course of the last few years? For a couple of different reasons. Kelly, speaking about leaving Notre Dame, says, well, we got the program back where we wanted to be, and so therefore he was able to leave. But here's what we know, is that Kelly left Notre Dame because I don't think he thought he was going to win a national championship at Notre Dame, because I don't think he thought that Notre Dame was capable of doing that. He thought he was a national championship coach. He did not think that Notre Dame was a national championship program. Well, guess what? Since he's left, Notre Dame as a program has been totally elevated. I mean, say what you want about the Fighting Irish, but Marcus Freeman has stepped in and made them a perpetual contender now in the last 3 years. And any list of top national championship possible contenders this year, much the same way it will include Georgia, it also has to include Notre Dame here right now too. So you've got that situation where Kelly has to look around and say, I left Notre Dame and they got better. Then he comes to LSU and he just couldn't handle it. And this is one of those things that, people talk a lot about, why coaches make so much money. And, there is always this effort seemingly to confiscate some of this wealth, that somehow, we got to create a system that takes from these coaches and, gives to somebody else. But if you want to understand why, in some cases, coaches get paid the money they get paid, the Brian Kelly situation is an example of that. That there is so much pressure to a place like LSU, where the previous 3 coaches before you got hired all won championships. Ed Orgeron did, Les Miles did, Nick Saban did. That you step into a role where it's national championship or bust. That's the only thing that's success. Anything below that is not a success. Well, if not for high compensation, who would take that job? Because it's not just the fact that you're eventually out of work. You really suffer indignity along the way. That Brian Kelly, for having taken the LSU job, has had his reputation tarnished. Professionally, he's, to a certain extent, untouchable right now. He just is diminished. He is so much smaller in this profession than he was before he took the LSU job. So if the job doesn't come with gigantic compensation, good luck getting anybody to take it. And now Kelly runs the risk of, much the same way he leaves Notre Dame, it's elevated. I think most people think that upon his departure at LSU, it's going to be elevated too. And in this same interview, one of the things that Kelly talks about is how much they're spending on NIL, and essentially insinuating that they're giving Kiffin resources they didn't give to Brian Kelly. And I would say that's probably true. But if you really want to understand what Lane Kiffin has figured out in this current age, he's figured out how to get people to separate themselves from their own wallets. And if you've ever tried to raise money for any cause, you know that's not an easy thing to do. Getting people to just give it up is not an easy thing to do. But Lane Kiffin has passed the plate and collected the offering. He did it at Ole Miss. He's doing it at LSU. There is a lot about Lane Kiffin that I would say probably leaves a good bit to be desired. I just think that's true. Not my favorite guy, probably. But he is way better than Brian Kelly at something like this. Kelly either didn't want to play the game, couldn't figure out how to play the game. This all seemed really foreign to him. In the pay-for-play era, how do I make sure I've got the roster I need to compete for a championship? Well, for better or worse, it's not foreign to Lane Kiffin. Now, it hasn't quite worked out for Kiffin yet. They missed the playoff at Ole Miss in 2024. He was gone by the time they got there in 2025. So he's got to show something too, and maybe he won't on the field. But if you want to know why Kiffin's employed and Kelly's not, it's the relationship that both coaches had with NIL that probably helps explain that as much as anything else. And so if you're Brian Kelly, now you don't need to work again, but if you want to work again, and he's young enough that he certainly could, it's hard to wonder, where do you go from here after all of this, where really your last 2 jobs, I think, leave people asking some questions. Interesting time for him, and interesting to hear him talk about that here this week. Speaking of coaches and speaking of big-time salaries, did y'all see where Ohio State defensive coordinator Matt Patricia's gotten a new deal there in Columbus that I think reportedly is going to pay him $3.75 million a year to be the defensive coordinator? Now, let me give you a quick addendum, then I'll get to the main point. When I'm way wrong about something, I have to acknowledge, and I was pretty wrong about Patricia coming to college football. This to me seemed like an odd fit. A lot of NFL guys, I think, sometimes get the misguided notion that college football is going to be easier than the NFL is, and it's just not. It is different from the NFL, but it is not easier. And so therefore, a lot of very NFL-centric minds have had a hard time in college football. But Patricia really wasn't one of those guys. The Ohio State defense was still really good last year. In fact, they were probably led by defense more so than offense last season in a way we hadn't seen Ohio State be in quite some time. So Patricia was successful. But the story here, though, is the gigantic salary. And one of the things that I think is interesting about this is that Ohio State, for the most part, is all in on NIL. They're probably not the biggest roster cost in college football this year, but they may have been 2 years ago when they won the national championship. They were at least close. So they're all in on NIL. And for a program that's all in on NIL and willing to do bidding wars for transfer players, I find it pretty compelling that they still value coaches to this point, because there is a theory, and I think it's an incorrect one, but there is a theory that Well, in a world of paying players, we don't need the coaches anymore. It's really the players that matter, and therefore the coach's salary should go towards the players. Well, here's Ohio State that's all about paying players, but they also want to pay coaches too. That there's no doubt that the professionalization of the player ranks has changed college football, but it hasn't made coaching less important. This is still a hierarchy of competency, and the coaches at the very top of this list, be it head coach or assistant, still have outsized value compared to anybody else. The top 10% of coaches is probably more valuable than the bottom 90% combined. And we're seeing an example of that great coaches are just as scarce a commodity as great players. And Ohio State being willing to pay a defensive coordinator this sum of money then gives you an idea. The programs are trying to figure out how to pay their players, but the best ones are still going to have the best coaches too. Ohio State, an example of that. And we'll finish with this, by the way. Speaking of the Big Ten, I saw where I guess they're petitioning. I don't even completely understand this necessarily. They essentially want to do away with the tampering rules, which if you want an idea of just – people say, okay, we got the SEC and the Big Ten. These are the two big leagues, and they are going to push college athletics towards its future. Whatever it is, it'll be decided by the SEC and the Big Ten. Could these two leagues feel more different right now, where you've got the SEC, Greg Sankey acknowledging this week, the SEC seems to want some rules and would even be willing to, according to the telling of some, including University of Georgia President Jerry Moorhead, break away, form their own independent entity, I guess if you want to say it that way, as a way of trying to enforce some rules on a smaller group of programs. That's how much the SEC values rules, at least we're led to believe. The Big Ten, on the other side, apparently doesn't value rules at all, so much so that according to the reporting we've read this week, they don't even think the tampering rules should exist. Now, some of this is procedural because they feel like programs ought to be able to back channel with agents and whatever. It's happening anyway. Very hard to enforce. If you can't enforce it, maybe you shouldn't have a rule. And in some respects, that's a line of thought that at least makes some sense. But still, the fact that the Big Ten wants to move in a direction of less enforcement, the SEC, at least according to its words, wants to move in a direction of more enforcement, puts a chasm between these two leagues. And the cynical-minded among us will want to point out that this week there was an accusation that an Auburn assistant coach in basketball had gone to, and I forget which conference it was, the Atlantic Sun, something like that. He's basically sitting courtside like Jack Nicholson did it for the Lakers games. You've got an Auburn assistant sitting courtside at these games to tamper with the players while they're on the floor to get them to transfer somewhere else, because the transfer portal in basketball opens, I think, while the tournament's still going on. If you think college football is a mess, y'all should just spend 5 minutes looking at the crazy stuff that happens in college basketball. It's beyond a mess. Whatever college football is, college basketball is far worse, far more messy overall. So the SEC is certainly not perfect. Its hands aren't completely clean when it comes to the issue of tampering. But the SEC, at least in its word, says it wants some rules. Apparently the Big Ten doesn't want any at all. So how you make sense of all of this, boy, these are challenging times. But we'll follow wherever it goes next. We'll make that your SEC through. As we say goodbye here today, one of the things we talk about a lot is our good friends at Mercier Orchards Hard Cider. And Mercier Orchards is grown right here in Georgia, in the beautiful mountains of Blue Ridge, Georgia, up there with where the Mercier Orchards are. And I stumbled across this the other day, and it's one of those things, I honestly couldn't remember if I gave a golden shoe for this or not. So this may be a repeat, but if it is, I don't intend for it to be. Our buddy Santi Thorne writing in to let us know that he's spending some time up there at Mercier Orchards. How great is this to see? Georgia gear, Georgia fan, hanging out at Mercier Orchards. That's the real place where the apples are grown, where it comes from. He says he loves to see Mercier Orchards be a sponsor here on Dawg Nation because he's been going up there enjoying their apple fritters for a very long time. I love to see that. That's a thrilling thing to be able to see. We love Mercier Orchards and their partnership with us, and we all enjoy the delicious taste of Mercier Orchards Hard Cider, so we'll give Golden Shoe there to Santi for that. Lousy stinking Gators, they've got nothing to enjoy right now because it's been 1,951 days since Florida's beaten Georgia. That is a Gator hater updater. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. We will look forward to talk to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cooldown. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on that. Let me take care of a small piece of business, and then we will get into a handful of comments. I can't stay real long today, but we'll do some of those. So the feedback I'm getting thus far, and I'm getting a decent amount, people seem to want to do the bracket challenge again. They seem to want to do the Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge again, despite the fact the last couple haven't quite gone as they're supposed to do. So what we may do is we may invite last year's winners on the air to basically christen the new experience. And as I said before, I think I may do some Georgia-themed giveaways on this to try to make up for what I haven't done before. We'll see. We may do that. We may do that because I wasn't going to bring it up, but since y'all have been bringing it up, we may do that. D. Nelly drawing a comparison between what might be happening between the SEC and Big Ten and other events in American history. I'll let you use your imagination on that. Let's see what else. Foster Moss says BA's got to hold up his end of the bargain this year. Yeah, I mean, hopefully, I am an imperfect person, right? But hopefully one of the things I am good at is being self-aware, being humble enough to receive feedback, correction. When it comes to the Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge, something we've done for fun, we have not executed that as well as we could have. We take the L on that. So, Foster, I think you're well within your rights to point that out. Well within your rights to point that out.
Just so you know, there is literally a mailroom. Like if you fall through that wall right there, there is a mailroom right there. And it's got packages and all kinds of stuff.
Does it have stamps? Can I take this? Do I have access to stamps?
Possibly. We will find out.
There you go. So that needs to happen.
You don't even have to go to the post office, which I know is an experience.
That's right. So there you go. Bill Camacho says, do I have confidence in the Hoop Dogs to go the distance, the SEC tournament play? I think that today feels like a very winnable game. It'd be nice to see them win this game. I think today is winnable. Ole Miss, tonight? And then we'll see after that. But, yeah, I mean, I think it's a winnable situation. Jeff Ingram says Florida's now tracking how long it's been since UGA beat the Gators in basketball. That is true, but last year Georgia did win. So even though Florida eventually won the national championship, I'm a big head-to-head guy. And as far as I'm concerned, we don't recognize Florida's basketball national championship from last season because Georgia got the head-to-head nod. Matt Rukavina says, Brian Kelly's time at LSU was like that dog that's so ugly it's cute. It doesn't fit, but you kind of don't mind watching it. Yeah, it was certainly entertaining because, boy, you talk about fish out of water. Kelly in Baton Rouge was certainly an example of that. And anytime you have, because on any list of top 10 coaches, Kelly would have been on it. And he just got chewed up by the situation in Baton Rouge, just got swallowed by it. And it does make fewer people want to take jobs like that. It does. That's not for everybody. Most people do gravitate towards, the highest level of, professional achievement they can get because they're curious. But this does make some people not want it because Kelly is worse off now than if he had never taken the job to begin with, at least in terms of his professional opportunities, probably. Brian Whitaker mentioning the Braves TV announcement. I'm telling you right now, I don't understand this at all. I get the streaming part of this, but the one thing that I don't understand are the games going to be on television? Because at one point in time, there was an announcement about some of these games, unspecified number, being on the gray stations like Channel 46 and Peachtree Sports and whatnot. But that wasn't mentioned at all yesterday. And I still pay for cable. So if I'm paying for cable, am I going to get Braves games? Because I love the Braves. I really do. I'm about tapped out, though, on subscriptions. I just am. I'm about tapped out on subscriptions. And I'm a huge Braves fan, big Braves fan. But just about tapped out on subscriptions. So I don't know. I mean, people say $100 is a great deal. Is it? I don't know. I don't know. Randy Hall also mentioned another coach that fell from grace. That's Jimbo Fisher. Yeah, Jimbo was a national champion at Florida State, goes to Texas A&M, gets tons of money. But professionally, he's in a worse place now than he was before he took the job. I think that's probably true. He was also running into some trouble at Florida State, and at the time, I'd probably blame Florida State on that. Looking back, that probably wasn't all Florida State's fault. But, yeah. Brian Whitaker says that the Braves division will still be on cable and satellite providers. But they didn't really say that, though. And if all that is just a work through for my provider to charge me $100, I just don't know. Man, I'm paying a lot of money for content. Most of it I don't even get to watch. And that's the thing is, like I said, I love the Braves, but y'all are the same way. I'm not special. I'm running around all the time. It's not like I'm sitting in front of the TV every night at 7:05 p.m. So you're essentially asking me to pay $100 for something, and $100 is not going to break the bank. I mean, I'm not going to, sleep in a ditch for $100, but you're asking me to pay $100 for something I'm not sitting in front of the TV at 7:05 like I am Georgia football, where I build my whole life around it. I don't have time to do that. So, I would consider myself a huge Braves fan. Most nights, though, I would consider myself a passive viewer of Braves baseball. Does that make sense? I follow the team closely, but that doesn't mean I'm staring at the screen like this every night at 7:05. No, I would say that few people do that. I have it on, and I'm generally aware of what's going on, but if I devoted 4 hours every day to the Braves, intently viewing it, it'd be like having a second job. Jerry Popham says that Brian Kelly blew his credibility at LSU right from the beginning. And I think that's true. And I feel like, we talk all the time about what we get right, what we get wrong. We got this right. That was, even though it was like a viral video that people love, just make a big deal of viral stuff, I felt like that was a big deal. I do. And the fact that Kelly was not really properly able to explain it, I think also made it a big deal. And by the way, politicians do this all the time. As somebody who has a real Southern accent, I know a fake one when I hear it, and people fake Southern accents all the time. So a coach doing this is not that different, but it's pretty obviously fake, pretty obviously faked on purpose. And the fact that when Kelly was called out about it, he didn't completely dismiss it. The right way to handle that would be like, look, I don't know why people are making a big deal because I mispronounced family. I don't know why I said it that way, but I can promise you, you could have downplayed that, but he didn't. Almost like he got caught. It was a very weird situation. And someone has that little comfort in his own skin that you're trying to be something you're not, as Jerry just said in the comment section, that was a harbinger of what was going to be to come. I don't disagree with that. Rambo says he was at the Colorado game where Joe Cox had to come in and save our bacon. This is 06, right? Georgia had some issues that day. That was also, there are only a small handful, I'm talking about a small handful of games in my lifetime for Georgia I have not watched. But that was a game that I did not watch. Unfortunately, back in 2006, that was the day of my grandfather's funeral. And I was very close to all my grandparents, very close to my grandfather in particular here. The first death in my family I ever experienced. And his funeral was on the day of the Georgia-Colorado game. And hearing the story of that game was very weird because you had to have it relayed to you. Yeah, Joe Cox came. It's like, Joe Cox, are you serious? But yeah, that was a day that is, it may be in, however many years, 40 years, 2 or 3 games I didn't see, but that was one I didn't see. Matt Rukavina says the worst fake Southern accent he ever heard was Nick Cage in Con Air. Yeah. I think that, obviously Nick Cage is a source of a lot of, attention. He's a little bit of a cult hero now. But, I think that Nicolas Cage is a good actor, a very good actor. But, yeah, a little bit of an odd accent in Con Air probably. Alan Verbanchik liked the fake accent. He thought it was funny. Scott Boland says, wasn't there a problem with the cable feed during the Colorado game? I don't know. Was there? Could have been. I also remember in 2010, Georgia goes to Boulder and lost. Like, there are a lot of games that have been lost to time, thankfully forgotten. Losing at Colorado. Was that during the A.J. Green suspension? Maybe it was. But, boy, losing at Colorado, that's not fun. G. Gray says he's convinced that Brian Kelly failed because he wouldn't listen to his staff. He seems to be a one-man show. Maybe that's the case. They also, going back to 2024, made a big deal about wanting to spin on the defensive line, and they just didn't. I think some of these coaches just had a hard time figuring out the NIL game because for them it was very different. And I do think it was, for him, maybe just a little too different, I think. Danny Thomas says Stetson Bennett would be a good addition to the Raiders. He says bad offensive line, mobile quarterback who's been in the NFL for 3 years, and yet they can get on the cheap while Mendoza develops. That's interesting. Could see that being true. Could see that being a nice fit. Randy Hall pointing out that Demolition is going to the WWE Hall of Fame. Did see that. Happy for them on that. I guess all three members, because by the end they were rotating. Axe, Smash, and Crush. Crush, played by Bryan Adams. But I did see they're going to the Hall of Fame. That's a deserved thing. That's one of those deals where Demolition was a total ripoff of the Road Warriors. Total ripoff. And thinly veiled, even at that. And yet they went on to have a good bit of fame and popularity in their own right. That is true. Jonathan Aaron says when Lane gets fired, you think Kirby's going to hire him? I don't know. I did see we didn't show him we try to give some, privacy around here. Lane Kiffin on his Instagram story showed the picture of Kirby Smart in the Bahamas. That's been going viral. You probably saw that. We didn't put that on the screen today just because, I don't know. We try to give these guys a little bit of privacy, but that is out there. Apparently they were in the Bahamas together. Bill Camacho checking out. Bill, good to see you. Let's see what else. Andrew Sisson, good to see him checking in, saying Stetson deserves a chance to be the quarterback one. Raiders will be a nice fit. I believe he gets the chance, he'll remain a starter. Yeah, it'd be fun to see. I'd love to see that happen. I'm just happy to see Stetson, back in football again. I think that's a great thing. Would love to see that. Randy Hall also pointing out the Falcons brought in 2 new dogs, Azeez Ojulari and Channing Tindall back with Atlanta too, which is great. I think that some people, do I have this right? Or maybe a little concerned that Tindall might be slipping out of the NFL before last season, so nice to see him back in. And in the case of Azeez Ojulari, here's what I'll tell you. With Tua Tagovailoa coming to Atlanta, we're going to hear a lot about, Tua made the big pass in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Now he's back here playing. For everything I hear about Tua Tagovailoa playing at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, I better also hear about Azeez Ojulari in the 2020 Peach Bowl, because individually, that's as good an individual game at Mercedes-Benz Stadium as you're ever going to see. Against a pretty good Cincinnati team, Ojulari just lit the world on fire. He was unbelievable that day. Unbelievable. Rambo says it can't get any worse at quarterback for the Raiders, but I also don't want to see Stat broken into multiple pieces. Yeah, Las Vegas is a franchise, a little bit of a mess. Garrison Tucker says, does Jordan Hall finally have the year we needed him to? I think he could. I think him coming back is a big deal. Him coming back is a really big deal, I think. And I think he could be a very good player. Let's see what else. Brooke Dog says, all I care about at the Raiders is get someone who can get Brock Bowers the ball. He's a Hall of Famer if you can get it. Yeah, I would agree with that. I'd love to see him have the career he deserves to have. I would totally agree with that. UJ Marine checking out. Appreciate you being here, Marine. Let's see what else. We're going to do a couple more. I'm going to go. MG says that Stetson's better than 3/4 of the starting NFL quarterbacks right now. I'd love to see him get his chance. I would. That'd be a really fun thing. G. Gray says he thinks that Tom Brady is going to change the Raiders. Maybe so. I mean, I wonder a little bit about a Brady situation, like I wonder with, like, say, Matt Ryan with the Falcons. It's like, okay, well, clearly you're a good face for the organization, but do you really have a vision for changing it? In other words, I'm going to date myself here. Like, when I was a kid, Jerry West was the Lakers general manager, and West had been a great player. He's the logo. He's the silhouette that is the league's logo. But Jerry West, former great player, made himself into a great executive. That he was a former player that really made himself into an executive. He had a big vision for what he wanted the Lakers to be, and a lot of their success, the Kobe Bryant trade, things like that, that was his execution. Does, like, a Tom Brady or a Matt Ryan, do they really have the big vision, or are they just the face of all of this? Because, once again, in the case of Matt Ryan, like, being a team president is a huge job. It's a huge job. I mean, and it's not just picking the players. It's how do you organize the scouting department? And, what do you do as far as, like, salary cap tabulations? And, what's your basic theory on how the analytics department should work? There are all these departments that are not really on field that also have to be managed too. And all of that trickles up to you. It's a gigantic job. Is Matt Ryan really interested in doing that job, or is he just a cover for the same cadre of people that have been running it to continue running it? I guess I'd be curious about that. And it's easy to understand why the Raiders wanted Tom Brady. They were thought to be, an inept franchise. They were thought to be a little bit of a, especially in my lifetime, because I'm not old enough to have known, like, the great days of Al Davis and, like, John Madden was coach and some of that. They've mostly been an embarrassment, moving from Oakland to L.A., back to Oakland again, now to Las Vegas. Al Davis is always, back when he was live, always sort of suing. Then you've got Mark Davis with the weird haircut. So it's easy to understand why the Raiders wanted Tom Brady, but does Brady really want to be the leader of an NFL franchise? I just don't know.
All right, you ready? Little archive action?
Let's do it. I have no idea what this is about to be.
2006, San Francisco. You never got to see this.
Oh, how about this? Here is the 2006 Georgia-Colorado game. A game I didn't see.
Cox back to pass, going to dump it off to Brandon Sutherland.
How about that?
Off to the races he goes.
And Ralphie was there that day. Is that correct?
I was shooting the game from the sideline, and old Ralphie ran by. I was shooting it for Georgia at the time.
So it's pretty crazy. Because Ralphie, you saw this, I'm sure, Cody. Ralphie's dangerous. Like, this is not a joke. This is not like, like if Ralphie shakes free of his handlers, then we're all in trouble. So what was it like seeing him in person?
He was not as, to be honest, as huge as I thought he would be.
Right?
I don't know if it's a smaller buffalo bison. I don't know. Excuse my ignorance. But there's 4 dudes around him the whole time, guiding him, trying to keep him on track. But there's nothing they can do. There is nothing they can do.
Yeah, Ralphie's going to go where he wants to go, and you're really along for the ride. Now, when you see Bevo, I do think Bevo casts a pretty big shadow, right? Now, he's also...
No, Bevo is massive.
Yeah, he's, is also a cheap shot artist, as we found out in the 2018 Sugar Bowl, but cast a wide shadow. Ralphie's more along the lines of, he's just doing what he wants. And wasn't Deion Sanders, he said he was afraid of Ralph, which I would be too, but he said he was afraid of Ralphie. Didn't Deion say that?
I didn't see that, but I can imagine, yeah.
Yeah. So thank you. There you go. There's a little highlight from the 2006 Georgia-Colorado game. The day of my grandfather's funeral, unfortunately for me. Let's see what else. Jimmy Hoskins says, is Arthur Blank Matt Ryan's father-in-law? No, that's Matt Ryan is married to Sarah Marshall, not the movie character, but no, she's not related to Mr. Blank, I don't believe. Let's see anything else. All right, a couple of final comments. Alan Verbanchik says, back in the days of the elite walk-on fullbacks at UGA, yes, indeed, that is the case. 2006 was also a wild season because early on, Georgia was not very good. And we haven't had, thankfully anyway, a lot of bad seasons. You know what I'm saying? Like, a lot of programs eventually have, like, the bad season. Georgia's mostly avoided that. But for a good while in 2006, which is the year that highlight we just showed you came from, Georgia's pretty bad. And it set up Steve Spurrier. And Spurrier was, of course I don't like this, but he was always good at this. Pointed out one point in time, midway point 2006 season, that Georgia had lost its most recent game to every team in the SEC East. There was a point in 2006 for which that was true. And so year after winning the SEC championship, things seem to have really slipped. But by the end of the year, Georgia's playing really good football. They went on the road to a highly ranked Auburn team, blew them out. I think it won like 24-3, something like that. Won a pretty thrilling game against Georgia Tech. Fun Larry Munson call on the Muhammad Massaquoi touchdown, one of my personal favorites. Late career Munson calls. And then in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, just called the Chick-fil-A Bowl back then, against a pretty good Virginia Tech team, they're down 24-3, came back and won the game. I got to do sidelines of that game on the radio, which was fun. That's back during my, Bedlam in the Tunnel era. I got to do sidelines on the radio. So I got to work a Georgia broadcast, at least it was radio broadcast. A, a really fun time in my life, but also B, Georgia salvaged what was looking like it was going to be a bad season. Georgia was heading towards something not so good, but by the end of the year, they're playing pretty good football. All right, last stuff. Brian Whitaker says the last time the Raiders were relevant, went to the Super Bowl in 2003, they got beat by the Bucs. Rich Gannon was their quarterback. Yeah, and a lot of you remember this. Their starting center, I believe his name was was it Barrett Robbins was his name? He just disappeared. I still don't know what happened to that. Hope nothing terrible. But he just disappeared right before the Super Bowl. Boy, what a strange thing that was. Alan Verbanchik wants to bring back the fullbacks. I kind of agree. I like fullbacks. Danny Thomas says if Uga got a hold of Bevo's ankle, the big cow will be whining like a little girl, and Uga ain't letting loose. Yeah, I mean, we said this at the time, that if it's a fair fight, if Uga sees Bevo coming, Uga, much smaller, but the point is he's a bulldog. Jump up, go for the throat. Now, I'm not looking to see Uga kill Bevo any more than I want to see Bevo kill Uga. I don't need to see bloodshed between my mascots. But part of the issue in that Sugar Bowl was the fact that, sucker punch, kind of trapped in a corner. Bevo goes for the spear in a way that Uga was just at a huge disadvantage. But if Uga, as a bulldog, sees the bull coming, that's a totally different fight. Totally different fight. All right, we're going to go. Foster Moss says the Raiders haven't recovered from when they cheated them with the Brady Tuck rule. That's actually a good take, Foster. You have a lot of good takes, but that's a good take. Because, the next year when the NFL tried to explain the Tuck rule, which was essentially part of the beginning of the Tom Brady legend, like the Raiders just walked out of the room. Yeah, it's one of those things that just gets forgotten how controversial that was. So controversial. Raiders were furious. And it is true, right? They really haven't been much relevant since then. That's a good point. All right, we're going to go. All right, y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price promised. You can trust them on all of that, including, like last night, turn the heat back on. This is that time of year. AC on, AC heat. The good news is air conditioning and heating, RS Andrews can help you out with both. So make sure both your systems running the way they're supposed to be. RS Andrews can ensure that for you. Online, rsandrews.com. Have a great day, everybody. We're back tomorrow. Close out the week strong. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We'll look forward to talking to you then.